Jaden Daniels just sent a legal cease and desist to LSU, his own school. Why? They handed his number 5, his Heisman number, to another player without a heads up. And there's a heavyweight name caught in the middle nobody saw coming. Meanwhile, back in Ashburn, the O-line is still a mess. With Nick Allegretti out, Julian Good-Jones got worked against Miami, and center is shaping up as the number 1 problem before week 1. But the good news came from the defense. Daronte Jones's unit wrecked Miami's offense, with Mike St. Ree still stealing the practice. Raise hail. Alright man, let's sit with this one calmly, because a lot of people are reacting without understanding the full sequence of what actually happened. Let's walk through it step by step. On Thursday, ESPN's Mark Schlabach confirmed that Jaden Daniels' attorney sent a cease and desist letter to LSU. What does the letter ask for? That the university stop using Daniels' name, image, and likeness, basically his personal brand, without authorization. Why now, in the middle of training camp on the same day as the first preseason game? Because LSU handed the number 5 jersey, the same one Daniels wore when he won the Heisman in 2023, to an incoming recruit, cornerback DJ Pickett. That's the full trigger. I want to be precise here, because the details matter in a legal situation. It wasn't just that Daniels was upset to see another player wearing his number. The Daniels family put out a statement, cited by SI.com, saying they are deeply disappointed and feel it was disrespectful that LSU handed out that number without even giving them a heads up beforehand. That's what lit the fuse. It wasn't the number itself, it was the silence before doing it. On the other side, LSU head coach Lane Kiffin didn't budge an inch. He said publicly that Pickett was promised the number 5 during recruiting so that he would sign with the program. So LSU had already committed that jersey to a new player before this whole thing blew up, which tells you the program chose to prioritize a recruiting promise over honoring one of only 3 Heisman winners in that school's history. And that, to me, is where LSU made the first communication mistake in all of this. Now, Daniels himself came out and spoke on social media Thursday afternoon, and the tone was a lot more measured than the legal letter. He said, almost word for word, that he's been locked in on training camp, that he has a lot of gratitude for his time at LSU and what he accomplished with his teammates, but that there are issues to work out between his team and the university, and that his hope is for it to get resolved privately. Notice the gap between the tone of the legal statement, aggressive, formal, lawyer language, and the tone of Daniels' personal statement, calm, grateful, almost conciliatory. That gap tells me his representation is running a clear strategy here. Legal pressure on one side, soft public relations on the other. That's a smart move if the goal is to negotiate without permanently burning the bridge with his alma mater. And now, here comes the part nobody saw coming. Joe Burrow, the Bengals quarterback, also an LSU Heisman winner from that undefeated 2019 team that went 15-0, probably the best college football team of the modern era, got pulled into Schlabach's original report because his number 9 was never reissued after he left the program. So after the Bengals beat the Lions 16-14 in their preseason opener Thursday night, a reporter asked Burrow directly about Daniels' situation, and Burrow's answer was, honestly, the textbook definition of "don't drag me into this." He said he'd only heard about it a couple hours earlier and didn't know enough about the situation to have a real opinion. But then he dropped the detail that ended up fueling this entire story even further. He said that years ago, he was also told his number 9 would never be given to anyone else. And he closed with a line that, as an analyst, I think is the most honest thing said in this entire saga. But you never know what happens. That's not Burrow weighing in on Daniels. That's Burrow, without even meaning to, confirming that LSU handles these jersey promises informally, with no consistent written policy behind them, and that for me is the actual structural problem underneath all of this drama. Let me give you my personal take here, because I have a strong one and I want to be transparent with you. I think Daniels has every right to be upset, but I think the cease and desist letter is a tactical mistake at this exact point on the calendar. Not because it lacks legal merit, it probably has real merit, especially around the commercial use of his image, but because the season starts in less than a month, and this is stealing headlines from what should be the real conversation, how this offense with Stefon Diggs is going to look in 2026. Here's my prediction, and I'm giving you a specific date so you can hold me to it. By September 7th, week 1 of the regular season against whoever the opening opponent is, this whole thing gets resolved privately. No real litigation, probably with LSU making some kind of symbolic gesture toward Daniels, a special recognition, a commitment not to reissue that number in the near future, without necessarily stripping the jersey off Pickett in the middle of his own recruiting class. If I'm wrong, I'll say so right here on this channel, but for now, that's my read. And one last thought before we move on. People keep comparing Daniels to Burrow like this is some kind of legacy management contest. I'm not falling into that trap. Burrow won his Heisman with a historic undefeated national championship team. Daniels won his coming off a transfer from Arizona State, and he rewrote his career in Baton Rouge. Different contexts, different legacies, and honestly, arguing over who handles a public relations issue better doesn't add anything to the real debate, which is whether LSU is treating its recent legends the right way. Man, let's move from the lawyer's office to the weight room, because this next one is a real football problem, and honestly, this one worries me more than the LSU drama. We already talked on this channel about Laramie Tunsil's triceps injury and the offensive line crisis. Well, it turns out the other end of that same line, the center spot, is also on fire. Nick Allegretti, who was the early favorite to lock down the starting job, went down with a calf strain, and that forced Washington to speed up an evaluation that was supposed to be a lot calmer. On Wednesday, in the joint practice against Miami, Julian Good-Jones took the majority of first-team reps, and according to SI.com's report published today, it did not go well. Good-Jones had some tough reps against Miami's defensive tackles and got pushed backward multiple times. The line overall looked better in team periods, but the biggest takeaway is that the interior line wasn't sharp enough on several rushing plays. That's not a small detail. The center is the guy making protection calls, identifying blitzes, giving Jaden Daniels his first line of defense before the ball even leaves his hands. To reinforce the group, Washington already brought in Trey Hill and veteran Daniel Brunskill, who has appeared in 108 NFL games with 71 career starts. That's real experience in a room that, without Allegretti, had almost no proven starting history behind him. But here's the thing, and the report says this too, the fact that Good-Jones is still soaking up most of the first team snaps tells me Brunskill hasn't displaced him yet. And honestly, having a veteran with that much experience in the room without winning the job yet is itself a sign that the overall level of competition is still shaky. Washington is hoping to have Allegretti back by Sunday, which, if it happens, changes the entire picture again. But here's the real problem, the one nobody wants to say out loud. Even if Allegretti comes back healthy this weekend, this training camp has already given us 2 red flags in the span of a few days. First, Tunsil with a torn triceps. Second, the backup starting center looking vulnerable against a preseason defensive front that isn't even one of the scariest in the league. If this is what we're seeing in August against Miami in a controlled practice, imagine what could happen in October against an actual defensive line built specifically to attack the middle of the field. Here's my personal opinion, and I'm not filtering this one. I don't trust Julian Good-Jones as the starting center of a team that wants to compete for a Super Bowl. I say that with respect for the work he's putting in. I get that he's trying to earn a role with the opportunity he was given, but what we saw Wednesday is exactly the kind of rep that costs you games once the schedule gets serious. My prediction with a date attached. By week 1 of the regular season, Allegretti is the starting center, assuming his calf responds well over the next couple weeks of practice. And if Allegretti gets hurt again at any point this season, this becomes, without exaggeration, problem number 1 on the entire Commanders roster, even above any doubts we have about the secondary. A quarterback like Daniels, who we already know runs and exposes his body, needs a line that gives him clean pockets. Without that, it doesn't matter how many weapons Stefon Diggs brings outside, this offense can stall out fast. And to close things out, fam, let's get to the part of the day that genuinely put a smile on my face, because after lawyers and a shaky offensive line, I needed this one. On Wednesday, in what was the first ever joint practice held on the Ashburn grounds, Durante Jones's defense basically ruined Miami's afternoon. Amik Robertson blitzed on the very first play of the second 11-on-11 period and dropped the running back for a loss, setting the tone for everything that followed. Kalavon Chaisson practically lived in the backfield, and on the play right after Robertson's tackle, he took down quarterback Malik Willis for what would have been a sack in a real game. But the play of the day, no question, belonged to Mike Sainristil. He picked off Willis and ran it all the way back for his first interception of camp, celebrating afterward by punting the ball into the air air while his teammates chased him down in classic training camp chaos. And the numbers back up what we saw. By USA 9's count, the defense produced 7 practice sacks plus several additional pressures, and all of that using only about 20% of Durante Jones's playbook, according to linebacker Leo Chenal's own estimate. So Washington didn't even show its full hand, and it still gave Miami's offense fits the entire afternoon. Now, I want to be straight with you about Sonny Styles specifically, because I don't want to sell you a narrative that isn't fully confirmed. Some reports say Styles has been flashing on defense throughout camp overall, and others, including a direct note from Commanders.com about this specific practice against Miami, say that neither Styles nor Frankie Louvu had a standout play that particular day. I'm giving it to you exactly as it's reported, no exaggeration, but that doesn't change the bigger storyline, which honestly is the most interesting one from the whole defensive camp. Durante Jones himself said just a few days ago that he and Dan Quinn are deliberately pushing Styles to play at full speed, even if that means he makes mistakes. Jones's quote was basically, "I'd rather you go full speed and make a mistake than go too slow and get it right." That's a development philosophy, bro. That's not a player trying to sell you something with preseason stats. That's a coaching staff looking at Sonny Styles, the number 7 overall pick out of Ohio State, and seeing the kind of athlete who can change the face of this defense if they give him room to fail while he learns. Here's my personal opinion on this one. I don't care that he hasn't had the viral camp play yet. Look, I could be wrong, but when a defensive coordinator publicly tells you he'd rather see you fail at full speed than play it safe, that tells me they trust that player's ceiling more than any other rookie on this roster right now. My prediction, with a specific date attached, by week 4 of the regular season, Sonny Styles is the undisputed starter in this defense, and by the end of the year, he's a top candidate for Defensive Rookie of the Year in the entire NFC. If I'm wrong, I'll own it right here when the time comes. And that's how we wrap up today, fam. 3 completely different stories. A legal fight that's going to follow us for weeks. An offensive line that still hasn't found solid ground, and a young defense that, beyond the noise, genuinely has me excited about what Durante Jones is building. That's the roller coaster of following this team, and honestly, I wouldn't trade it for anything. This franchise has history, it has identity, and this year it has real pieces to compete for something big, as long as the line holds up and Jaden Daniels can stay locked in on what happens between the white lines while his people handle the LSU situation. If this video did something for you, drop a like, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments. Who's actually right in this fight with LSU, Daniels, or the university? See you in the next one. Raise hail, always.